Whether you're seeking inspiration, wisdom, or a fresh perspective on leadership and entrepreneurship, the Building Interest podcast has you covered. Together, we explore the successes of groundbreaking leaders, the triumphs, the challenges, and the invaluable lessons learned along the way. Our discussions go beyond strategic decision-making and delve into the personal hobbies and passions that keep these leaders inspired and grounded in their work. I'm your host, Greg Farber. Let's jump right in. Today, we're joined by Henry Manice, co-founder of Mighty Squirrel Brewing Co, passionate activist, innovative entrepreneur. Thanks for coming. We're happy to have you here.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here.
So we got to kind of start at the beginning, and we noticed you have a very impressive educational resume with Phillips Academy and Vanderbilt. And you got a degree in, I got to read this, it's a lot of words, Human and Organizational Development, International Leadership, and Economic Development. And these words kind of spoke to us because we love to talk about on our podcast, leadership, entrepreneurs, and things. So tell us a little bit, what was that focus area like to kind of get you started on your path?
Sure. So the short for Human and Organizational Development is just HOD. That's what we called it at school. So I actually started off in the School of Arts and Sciences, and I hadn't declared a major. And a friend of mine had taken some HOD classes that first semester and said that they were amazing. And so I got curious and I took a class and then ended up shifting over to the school that had that major within Vanderbilt. And I loved it. Basically, it started out with some human psychology, and then you see sort of the next class is, how do people fit into groups, and groups turn into high-performing teams, going through all the different phases of first everyone being very polite as they're getting to know each other, and then some people are more assertive than others, and then there's some storming that comes along with the group as you're working on a group presentation, and then you realize that you do have to drag the project across the finish line, and you all want to do well. So then eventually you go through this norming phase, and hopefully you reach a high performing phase. So I was sort of fascinated by that process because we lived it out in the classroom. And then the next sort of module was seeing, okay, how do the teams fit into organizations and companies? And
so that's where the leadership and the economic development kind of comes in.
Exactly.
So rather than studying economics for money or finance's sake as an accounting principle, you're moving into economics coming from that human background.
Correct. Exactly. And it's basically, especially with the international piece of it, is to see how interconnected organizations are with politics and the community, and there's no real silo for any of them, and so we studied a lot about that sort of that world of connectedness between organizations, and also between organizations and the government and the community. So that really interested me, and understanding how to run an organization. That was sort of the leadership component. Is,
right.
How do you run an organization effectively, and how do you structure it, and how do you create a good, healthy culture in a company, and all those sorts of things.
Was the idea of having a brewery sort of born out of a school project, or did that come later on?
It definitely came later on. But when I was at Vanderbilt, I started a clothing business with a friend of mine there called Injuba, and that's where I had my first taste of entrepreneurship and building a company and a brand, and I really enjoyed it. And then it wasn't until years later that I got into the beer space. So
gotcha. Now, so what's that like? You go from idea to launch, and we can come back to Injuba later. I definitely want to talk about that, but let's kind of stick with the brewery for now. You have this idea, you decide you want to do this. How do you get to the point where you actually have doors you can open? Like, what's that process along the way?
Well, it really starts with a friend. And when I moved out to San Diego I was actually working for a medical device company, and I was a product manager out there, and I started in January 2010, and a few months later, Naveen, who's my co-founder in Mighty Squirrel, Naveen Pavar, started working a few desks down from me, and on his first day of work, I asked him if he wanted to go and grab a beer, and we really hit it off, because it turned out that we both had started businesses before, and there was just so much shared experience in that, and we discovered, even on that first beer, but also as we got to know each other better, that we had a lot of shared values and shared interests in how we would run a future business someday.
And you just didn't like that beer, and you thought we can do this better.
And at that time, we actually were far away from thinking about starting a brewery, but we weren't that far away from deciding that we wanted to do something together. And one of the things that I loved about my previous entrepreneurial experience within Juba is I did it with a friend of mine and a co-founder, and you share that whole journey. And so when I met with Naveen and had a similar connection, we kind of settled on, okay, we want to start something, and there's no crazy rush for that. We're both learning a lot from where we're working now and enjoying our jobs, but it's kind of planted the seed.
But you don't have to do it all yourself if you have someone walking the path with you.
Exactly. And the other element of it that I, again, with my previous experience and also what I was looking forward to with the brewery with Naveen is that, if things don't shake out as we had hoped, or the business fails, then I've shared that experience with a friend, and there's just so much that goes into the relationship as you're building something like that I kind of felt like it was always going to be worth it regardless of the final outcome.
There's more passion and reward along the way than even if the outcome doesn't work out.
Exactly.
And of course, the opposite has happened. The outcome is fantastic. You guys just opened a second location outside of Fenway Park. So things presumably are going very well.
Things are going really well. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey. And, Naveen and I, we decided that we were going to start a brewery in 2011. It was December 17th, 2011 is when we got our first home brew kit from Kmart and brought it back to my kitchen. Our apartments were wall to wall. And just started home brewing. So actually home brewed for a couple of years. And
so you really can get somewhere with those home brew kits.
Exactly.
I've often thought about
very
trying
simple.
One, but I've never gotten
it was
one.
$20 and it worked. And we still brewed for several years in my kitchen before quitting our jobs and moving to Boston to set up shop. So it was, it's been a long journey since, and then we got going and have built out the team. So
now Boston's known for some local breweries that have been around for quite a while, and we've all noticed sort of you walk into a store and it's gone from a few beers on the shelf to hundreds of options. Very competitive space. What's it like to be a leader of a company and of an industry, of a market space in this selling beer with such a competitive mindset and all these different tastes and customers and things? What is that like to try to meet that demand?
It's nonstop. It's definitely a fire hose, and but we, Naveen and I, we I guess we thrive off of uncertainty and the challenge of it, and we don't generally get stressed out by things, but every day it's just a battle to make the best possible product, to make it consistently, to make sure that we have the best possible team and that our team enjoys working there, and all those sorts of dynamics. And so all of those things have to come together to internally and externally to eventually have a product that hopefully people enjoy.
You mentioned consistency, and of course you're constantly rolling out new sort of flavors. I don't know, is flavor the right word to use?
Sure. Beer styles, flavors.
Styles, perfect.
Yeah.
We'll go with beer styles. You're constantly rolling out new styles as well. How do you balance that sort of established, okay, you made something, you found that's what the people like, versus trying to now make something new and innovate a new style?
So as my co-founder Naveen likes to say, I guess the only guaranteed thing is change, and the market is constantly changing. So we have to keep our ear to the ground, and we can't be complacent. So we do have some beer styles, and one beer in particular, Cloud Candy, that's our top seller, and we've gotten great traction with that. But that's not everything. And a big part of our, I guess, positioning, it sounds like an oxymoron, is to have a very diverse portfolio of beers. Usually, market sort of positioning is to have, what's your one unique thing. And part of what makes us unique in some ways is that we have a broad range of beer styles. And there are other breweries that are more focused on say, IPAs or lagers. And that's not something that we ever want to do. So even though our top sellers ended up being Cloud Candy, we love to experiment and even, come out with recently we launched seltzers. So we have hard seltzers and hard smoothies and non-alcoholic beers. So we try out new things.
How's that selling?
So far, it's been great.
Nice.
We're not selling on shelves yet. We just launched it in parallel with Fenway. So we launched the Fenway location on March 14th this year. And the hard seltzers, the hard smoothies, and the non-alcoholic beers, all of those are just in the tap room. We're getting feedback from people. The reception has been fantastic so far. So hopefully we can bring that to shelves soon.
Now, you mentioned having that diversity of product available. Would you say that's your primary differentiator against your competitors? Or is there something else that is kind of the secret sauce to Mighty Squirrel that you feel really sets you apart in the way that you either run the brewery or you sort of the vision for your business?
I think that the diverse portfolios is one. That's what the customer is sensing, and then building spaces that are timeless, that are long lasting, that are super high quality, and we're trying to. Mighty Squirrel. We're trying to create a fun brand, a joyful brand, and
the experience around the product.
Exactly, and our tap rooms are an expression of that. So when you come to our tap rooms, they're bright, they're cheery, they're joyful, and I think that's part of our hopefully long lasting recipe. And then the other part is actually very much internal, and that's every decision we make, we want it to be for the long term. So when we started this business, we wanted to build a company for the next 100 plus years. That's been our goal since the very beginning. And every decision we make and everything we do is really centered around that. And so I guess our secret sauce, and we're definitely not perfect, but our long-term thinking, hopefully we'll make it so that we can continue to share our beer and our tap rooms with people for a long time to come. And that, financial discipline is a big part of that.
Right.
And making sure we're not getting, ahead of ourselves and planning our work and working our plan and all that kind of thing. And so that could perhaps be a competitive advantage compared to other businesses where maybe they're not as focused on that. Not
losing sight of the fact that, yes, you want to have a joyful experience and you're creating a product, but you're also running a business that you want to position for the future.
Right.
So I'm always looking for some nuggets for our listeners, and I think here's a chance at a good one. We want people to have something they can take away and I heard this and something resonated with me. I want you to think about what you know now. You've got this successful brewer, you've opened a second location, things are going great by your account. Is there any piece of advice that you wish someone had given to you prior to starting your business? Where, man, we walked right into this roadblock and we did not see it coming.
Gosh, it
doesn't have to be specific to brewing. It can be about the business side of things as well, obviously.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the thing about starting a business and running a business is it's very unpredictable, and we make all sorts of plans and assumptions for things, and it never exactly works out that way. And so we've gotten a lot of great advice from people, and some of which we've followed, some of which we haven't. By and large, when we look back at the advice that we didn't follow, we think, gosh, I wish we had listened to that. That made a lot of sense. And, but sometimes if you always follow that path, then everything sort of happens for a reason, right? We wouldn't be where we are today. There's sort of a unique path. So I think it's okay. We don't spend too much time blaming ourselves or whatever it may be, or having regrets, right? Because
I'm almost hearing a little bit of the opposite of what I was fishing for, which is, yeah, it's great, listen to advice, but almost forge your own way and be willing to make potentially those mistakes, or don't listen to the advice, because that will make your brand unique. Is that a little bit of what I'm hearing?
I would say yes. Not sort of intentionally not following advice,
exactly.
but yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to have your convictions, and it's also complicated, especially like, my co-founder Naveen and I are, wrestling with things all the time, and sometimes you get advice, and that person isn't isn't on the ground with you and understanding some of the nuance, and there's only so much you can convey to someone versus them being in the room with you, and so then you make a decision accordingly, and it may or may not be a good one. But I guess if I have to think of one thing that comes to mind here is when we started Mighty Squirrel, we bootstrapped it initially, and then we raised money. And I don't think anyone could have prepared us for the feeling of taking on investment from friends and family, and
the gravity of you have other folks' money and time
exactly.
that you're now spending.
Exactly, and that sort of lives with you forever, and becomes it's always on our minds, and we're really excited to provide a return to investors, and that'll make us proud, and we're lucky enough to have built hopefully a long-term business where we can do that. But it's when we first raised money in 2014, and then in 2016 we had spent the money, and 2016 we weren't doing well at all, and we were staring down the barrel of does it make sense to shut this down or somehow give it another go and fuel up, and there was just this really intense feeling. It was quite emotional, actually, that let's take a second crack at this, and it's not just about gambling, but we really felt like, all right, let's take a second crack with this new plan, and give ourselves a chance to pay those investors back.
You feel like they believed in you, and you should honor that and
Exactly.
continue to go forward. That's awesome. I don't think we've ever had that particular sort of element of running a business and leadership come up. That's awesome. One more thing about beer, and then we'll go in a different direction for a second. Why Mighty Squirrel? Was there a squirrel that jumped out of a tree and attacked you one day, and you said, "I'm going to make a beer now"? Like, what happened?
Actually, something similar. I was out on a beach.
I totally made that up.
Yeah, it's pretty spot on, actually. It was Naveen and I were out at a tap room, and we had an idea for our original beer. We wanted to talk in code, so Naveen said, what's going to be our code word? And I just, it was a knee jerk, and I said, call it a squirrel, because a squirrel had stolen my taco out at the beach the day before. Very aggressive squirrels in California coming out of the rocks and pouncing on my food. And so for the next 2 years, it was all about, we called it Squirrel Beer, and taming the squirrels, removing squirrels, and adding squirrels, and it was never supposed to be our company name.
That's
but fantastic. After, we didn't tell anyone other than our parents what we were working on in the kitchen, and so we were then going to unveil this code word, and then we decided, actually, you know what, we've come to love squirrels, and let's think about what kind of squirrel we want. So we landed on Mighty Squirrel.
I think there's a certain brilliance in having a name that has nothing to do with what you're doing, because people remember it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no forgetting. I had a Mighty Squirrel beer. Like that just sticks with you. Like, what does that even mean? I love it. All right. I promised we would get off the beer for a minute and go in a different direction. And you mentioned, I believe it's called Njuba was another venture that you started. In fact, turns out you started it first. Mm-hmm. Now we had some notes about what that is, and it sounds amazing, but let's hear it in your words. What is Njuba, and how is that instrumental in kind of moving your process forward in terms of entrepreneurship and companies?
So Njuba means the rising sun in Lugandan, which is the Ugandan language. And I started it in 2006 with a close friend of mine, Will Keenan, the freshman year. And basically the quick backstory is that Will and I had seen this very moving documentary called Invisible Children, about child soldiers in northern Uganda, and we kind of got exposed to some terrible things that were going on the other side of the world, and we became very interested and curious, and looked for ways that we could spread awareness and get involved in some way. And so we actually started going down a political advocacy track, and went to DC to ask senators to support more foreign aid for Uganda, and then they sort of explained that it's a little more complicated than that, and the money doesn't, always end up where it should be, and different priorities, et cetera. And so anyways, Naveen's my Mighty Squirrel co-founder, but Will and I, we were we were at Brugger's Bagels in Nashville one morning and thought, what can we do that's a little bit different, where we could do something hopefully positive over in Uganda, but not necessarily the political route. And we were a little frustrated with the red tape. So we both loved video and photography, and thought, hey, maybe we can write a business plan and fly over to Uganda and put together a team of artisans and design products. So it was a clothing business, and also share their stories. So if you go to our website, you could click on a handbag or a sandal or a belt and see it made by the artisan start to finish in a quick video clip, and create that connection between the producer and the purchaser.
Primarily marketed locally, or then exported?
Actually, we were selling it over in the U.S. through our website. So both of our closets in our dorm room were packed with all kinds of jewelry and clothing. So that was our warehouse, and then we'd go to the UPS store and ship things off.
So rather than have the government funnel money potentially to the wrong folks, you guys decided to find a business plan that would ultimately funnel profits back into the community where it was coming from?
I guess, yes. I guess we kind of viewed it as a pretty different and distinct thing, just that sort of matched our interests and skills, and we had this sort of sense of agency that we could do something together and hopefully have some positive impact. I mean, we were tiny and small, and the government is doing amazing things for countries all over the world and being helpful. We just sort of thought maybe we could find our place a little bit differently, and so we.
Have you been back? Are you seeing an impact from what you're doing?
I have been back numerous times, and I go over there most years, and Juba actually has continued on. So it was originally a clothing business, and then we started a class on entrepreneurship in a secondary school over there. And
wait, you started a class on entrepreneurship there?
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So the being young college kids in our heads, I guess we thought that in order for a business to be good, it had to have a nonprofit arm. Okay. That we had to do something, quotes, good with our profits. And so our idea was, hey, maybe we can make this profitable clothing business and then send profits over to our nonprofit arm that can be focused on, say, education. And then that would make the sort of the whole thing good. And what we found out over the years is just that the bottom line for-profit clothing business was having as much of an impact or more in a lot of ways than the nonprofit, and really? in providing incomes and just the whole experience of working together with a team and bringing people together and having all the artisans being excited about creating high quality products and having the international component, all those things, that we didn't need a nonprofit arm to justify that at all, as kind of what we learned. Having said that, we loved working, on the class, and over time, and Juba actually evolved into a microfinance bank because we originally started giving some loans to the artisans. We had a savings investment program that we set up with them to get micro loans, and then we started giving loans to hundreds of people, and then in parallel, we started a spelling bee. And it seems a little bit random, but it was in the education space, and the spelling bee really took off. So over 1.5 million kids have gone through.
And all this is happening there in Uganda.
It's happening over in Uganda, and so when we realized that the spelling bee was, I guess, more of a competitive advantage over there compared to microfinance. There's a lot of microfinance, and so we actually removed the distraction of the microfinance and shut that business down, so that Njuba now is entirely focused on improving education over in Uganda.
Wow. I don't know what to say. That sounds absolutely amazing, and two such different businesses, and yet it sounds like a lot of the same sort of thought process and how to test things out and decide what's working and what's not working.
You just got to keep at it. Within Njuba, it evolved over time, and it just you never know where things are gonna lead. And so Njuba is now a spelling bee in a school, and we've got sort of a few other programs that we're working on, and but it's the same brand, it's the same mission, and some of the same team members I've been working with since the clothing business days. So and with Mighty Squirrel, it's just been a very unexpected journey in so many ways, but you kind of just, Naveen and I have kept our heads down and you see where it goes.
I'm nervous to ask now if that leaves you with any free time. I was going to dig into a little bit of Henry, the person outside of work. You're probably going to tell me you have 3 other ventures going and you have no free time. What do you do for you?
So I actually I'm married, and my wife Anna, and we have 2 kids. Luke, who's 6, and Owen just turned 1, and so whenever I can, I love spending time with them. But being an entrepreneur and with Mighty Squirrel is just so integrated into the fabric of our lives, so there isn't a distinct separation from the two. And having said that, I do actively try to find times where I can disconnect.
Right.
But it's Mighty Squirrel is a big part of our life, and so in terms of free time, I'm pretty busy with Mighty Squirrel, and the whole Mighty Squirrel team they're also our friends. Now we have over 100 employees, and we're working day in, day out with them. So it's hard to even imagine that work, because I really enjoy working with all of them, and then family time and activities for Luke. Owen's a little young right now, but
it'll only get busier.
Exactly.
For sure. So if it's not as secret as maybe the latest beer recipe, if you can share, are there any new plans for you on the horizon? Anything personally or professionally that you're kind of the next thing in the works? I know you just opened another location, so that was a big milestone already, but kind of looking forward, what's next for Henry and the beer team?
I would say professionally, our big goal right now is, and it's a close goal of mine directly, is to find every possible way to make the business sing. And to make it sing, you need, just process and procedure and finding ways to empower my team more. And, I think I would like to think that we're not micromanagers. We live and breathe the business every day. We love it. We're very active, but we do try to empower everyone on the team, but we want to take that to the next level, which will allow us to be even more successful for the long term. So professionally, that's going to be a big focus, is
really build out that culture.
Build out that culture there, and speaking of culture, what ties to that is, if we work really hard and things are going well, then it makes it all fun and exciting and worth it. Right. But if you work really hard and you're not really getting good results, and you're burning the midnight oil, and it's just exhausting, and you get home from work and you don't have a smile on your face, whether it's me or anyone on our team, like that's not a success for us. And even if sales are good, so our ultimate success is that, of course, we want to have beer that customers love and places that customers love coming to, but the big goal is that the 100 people on our team, when they go home after a good solid day of work, they're in a good mood when they shift gears to their families, their spouse, or their friends, whatever it may be, and a lot goes into that to sort of find that to create a place where that happens, and it's not easy, right? And we continue to be surprised at different times, but it's very much on our minds. And so I guess professionally, that's a big focus.
It's a good vision. It speaks to that idea of building a company for the future that's going to stick around. Mm-hmm. So I like that. Yeah. So here we're going to do a bit of a rapid fire segment that we added this year. So I'm going to ask you a series of this or that questions, and you just choose if you prefer one over the other. It's been something that's been really interesting to see how our gut instincts kind of help guide us. So feel free to elaborate on the answer, but the idea is to answer quickly. Even if you had a moment to think about it, you might answer differently.
Okay.
What's more important, a big milestone or a small win?
Small win.
Even with the big new opening, the small wins are how you got there?
Exactly.
What about finding inspiration or being an inspiration to others?
Finding inspiration.
Yeah? How do you do that? Where do you find your inspiration?
It comes from everywhere. It comes from
the small wins.
It comes from the small wins, but it comes from family. It comes from friends. It comes from our teammates, and everyone has something that they can share with the world that no one else can, based on their unique experience. And so, I think we have 3 core values at Mighty Squirrel: having a sense of responsibility, being open-minded, and being generous. Internally and externally, but that being open-minded, and it's something that my co-founder Naveen, he always says it's perspective, and it's so true. And so I think if we open our ears and our minds, you find bits of inspiration in ways where you didn't necessarily expect it.
Nice. So I read this question from the idea of brewing and your business. You mentioned lots of different beer styles versus, consistency and obviously operational stability. What's more important to you, the design or the data?
Data meaning?
Whatever you want it to mean.
Okay.
I'll tell you what I thought, but
gosh, that's a hard one. I'm a nut for design and
a nut for data.
And I'm also a nut for data. So, that's a tie for me.
Okay. We've never had a tie before. I like it.
Yeah.
See, I was thinking data in the sense that, this really sold, so that's a key part of what we want to do. Mm-hmm. But maybe if it wasn't a beer style that you actually want to sell, maybe you didn't like it. Maybe the design is more important than the fact that it's sold, than that long-term vision.
Right.
I like that, though, a tie. You mentioned that there's always change. Do you prefer the routine or the spontaneity?
Spontaneity. I definitely prefer the spontaneity. Having said that, a big part of our business is continuity and like I mentioned before, process and procedure and making things hum. And so with that becomes sort of consistency, right? You're trying to make sure that everything is made exactly the same, so that the customer is always having the same experience with the beer that they're having, that they've come to expect. But in order to, I guess we sort of feel like in order to have that consistency, you actually have a lot of spontaneity and creativity, I would say, to make that happen. How do you find ways to make it so that the team knows how to work together? It's like a little mini symphony to have that consistency. So I don't know, they're sort of related.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Passion or purpose? No more ties.
No more ties. Passion or purpose? I would say purpose.
I had a feeling you might go that route because of the comments you made earlier about your initial investors and sort of the stakeholders and that greater purpose. But I see so much passion in what you're describing and within Juba and with Mighty Squirrel and just your general demeanor.
Well, I don't, because you said no more ties, but I really think that
we can't have 2 ties in one episode.
But I think if you have a purpose, and for example, I mean, our Mighty Squirrel's purpose is to be adventurous and celebrate mighty moments, and to try out new things and knock down walls and sort of things like that. And so I think like you can't help but be passionate if there's purpose. It may be hard the other way around. You can have short spurts of passion, but if the purpose isn't there, then
you don't get where you're going.
I'm not sure it can last that long. So I think the purpose comes first.
Okay. Last one. You mentioned Cloud Candy as your best seller, but what's your favorite?
Depends on the day of the week, time of day, season. But I would say,
what's your favorite breakfast beer, lunch beer,
yeah,
dinner beer?
Exactly. I like lots of different beers at different times, but Cloud Candy is definitely a special beer for us. We had a series of pivots in our business coming into the beginning of 2018 as we embarked upon building a brewery. And with our first brick and mortar, prior to that, we were contract brewing for several years. So, different breweries were brewing our recipe. And so we were building our brick and mortar, and we were also transitioning to different brand theme where we were having sort of unique brand names and brand imagery for each beer style. And Cloud Candy was the first in that transition. And people have really enjoyed it. So it's been a huge part of.
It's very personally meaningful along the way.
I mean, it helped our business turn the corner, right? I mean, we were pounding the pavement. We were all working really hard, but we just weren't getting a whole lot of traction. And we felt like building a brick and mortar brewery and brewing our own beer and really plugging into the community was a big step. And having a beer that we really took to the next level. There was a lot that went into making that recipe and refining it. And so Cloud Candy is a big one for our team, and we kind of build around that.
So now we'll go to another new segment for our podcast this year. And when we talked prior to and kind of scoped out the episode a little bit, we talked about you bringing something with you today, whether it's a physical thing or a story or a memory or something that inspired you and something that you could share with us.
So this is actually one of our first handbags that we made with Njuba.
Oh, wow.
So this was the leather messenger bag by our artisan Kalunji. And the reason why I brought this in...
That's really nice.
Thank you. So the reason I brought this in is because these buckles are unique because in Uganda it was impossible to find buckles that you could get more than 4 of. So what we started doing is we went to these different sort of artisan shows and around town, and we would buy, say, some old belts, and then we'd cut the belt to get the buckle to put on these bags, and we realized, well, that works for 1 or 2 bags, but you can't really scale that. And so we were really struggling with that. And in the Ugandan that we were working with at the time, Francis, Aaron, got the idea of, well, let's just go to a mechanic and have them bend the wire as needed. And thought that was a pretty fun idea, and so we were able to make lots and lots of buckles because of that. And we literally just walked into a car mechanic, and so I guess 2 things out of that. One is really inspired by my Ugandan friend who had the idea to just think of that, and it's pretty creative, and also showing up to a mechanic and the mechanic not wondering why we weren't bringing a car and just taking us up on the project, and got creative, and we started twisting the metal in different ways and created this. And then we actually then returned with the bag once it was finished to show him. So I actually have a photograph of that moment. He was pretty psyched to see this bag. So here he is here. This is the mechanic.
Wow. Oh yeah, there's the bag.
And then this is the actual bag here. So
as it's being made.
These are 2 artisans, but Kalunji is the one who made this bag, and Julius was another artisan. And we had actually given a micro loan to Kalunji to buy a sewing machine, because in the first bag he was doing everything by hand, all the stitching.
Oh wow.
And so then he was able to get a sewing machine, but he didn't know how to use the sewing machine. But we had this other artisan, Julius, who did know, and so he came and taught Kalunji how to use a sewing machine on leather, and it kind of went from there. So
I know this is a pretty tall bar. This is amazing. This is an innovative thing you've done here. I love the repurposing of, rather than going and buying a bunch of buckles from some other factory somewhere, finding a way to make your own and involving them. I'm inspired by your story. Thank you for bringing this today. That's awesome.
Absolutely. So, I think and that's part of the fun of entrepreneurship is when you get started, like when we were starting the beer business, you're starting from scratch, and as you build it, you have to constantly think about different ways of doing things, and not really get constrained by necessarily what exists. And so I always think back to this experience with my Ugandan friend and the mechanic, the belt buckles.
Finding inspiration. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming today. I thought this was a really interesting kind of walk down a totally different business. We've talked so many different types of leadership and entrepreneurship, and to learn about your journey and what makes it work for you has really been interesting. Any last thoughts or comments or anything you'd like to share? And again, thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, really appreciate you reaching out to me, and enjoyed the conversation and meeting you all.
Thank you again. Don't forget to subscribe and rate our show. The Building Interest Podcast is live on all podcast platforms, YouTube, and TikTok. We want to hear what you think of each episode and encourage you to submit your questions that you'd like us to cover, so please find us on our YouTube or TikTok and comment your thoughts. All opinions expressed by Henry Manice are his own and not the opinions of Leader Bank NA. Leader Bank is not affiliated with the Mighty Squirrel Brewing Company or Njuba. For more information on today's subject, visit leaderbank.com. In addition to past episodes, you can find our Learning Center blog for more insights. This podcast is a production of Leader Bank, an equal housing lender, member FDIC, NMLS number 449250.